in the stillness of dawn, when the mind has yet to be filled with the noise of a new day, the soul begins to hear once again the familiar vibrations from its origin, and in one pure moment, the teaching is transmitted, like a subtle wave touching the deep layers of sacred memory. He says that no one enters this life without carrying a promise. The soul has agreed, has accepted to take on the body, to bear the burden of forgetfulness, so that in the journey through suffering, it may find its way back to the light. And now, this very moment is the call to return, not through hasty action, but through a deep awareness, for awakening does not come from what is loud, but from the moment the soul remembers what it never truly forgot. He has seen that soul wandering through life, believing itself to be alone, yet it has always been held within a gentle field of energy that cannot be broken. In the moments of collapse, when it seemed no one was watching, his eyes were still upon it, not as a supervisor, but as a keeper of the flame, silently watching over the light within the heart of the beloved child. He has never left, not because the soul is worthy, but because in divine love there is no measure, only eternal presence. And he reminds of what has been inscribed in the soul since ancient times, that within each person lies a seed of divinity, which cannot be destroyed, only covered each time the soul believes it has lost its way. It has merely stepped away from remembrance. There is no loss, only the distance between the vibration of God and the chaos of human emotion. But even within that chaos, as Beeks, he still sends signals through dreams, through quiet moments, through a gaze that is strange yet familiar, through nameless feelings, to those who believe they are unworthy. He says no one has ever been chosen for perfection, but chosen for willingness, not the willingness to go far, but the willingness to be still and to listen, not to do something great, but to be honest with the sacred within. For light does not need to defeat darkness. It only needs not to be hidden. The message is not given to shake the outside world, but to awaken the inner one. In every breath, in every heartbeat, the soul carries within it a map, a sacred memory of return. And in this moment, that map is beginning to unfold. He does not push. He does not demand. He invites. Like a patient father, he stands at the door of the spirit, not knocking loudly, but waiting for the hand to open from within. If the soul feels fear, it is understood, for nothing is more terrifying than facing the light after growing used to shadows. But he does not call the soul to judge it, but to remind that the weariness is not the end. It is a signal that the emptiness is not void, but a space kept open for the sacred to enter. And that sacred thing is now arriving. That voice does not come through the ears, but echoes in a more sensitive layer, the place the soul once listened from before the veil. And when a person reads this far, it is not by accident. It is a response. The soul has prayed, perhaps with tears instead of words. And he has answered, not with a miracle, but with a reminder that not everything will be easy, but nothing is meaningless. In that light, the soul begins to remember, not to learn, but to remember that it was never abandoned, never forgotten, and never lost its worth, because from the very beginning, the soul has been loved, and that love has never been withdrawn, only waiting to be recognized. And this is the beginning, not of a new journey, but of a new level of awareness of the journey already unfolding. His love is not based on human behavior or achievement. It does not come and go with the cycles of mood or morality. It is not affected by mistakes or by the distance humans believe they have created. That love does not depend on how much one believes, how often one prays, how strong or weak one feels. It simply is, and in that presence there is complete healing, enough to keep the soul from breaking even in what seemed to be the most hopeless hours. He has always been there, not as an idea or a temporary comfort, but as the living foundation of all existence. There is no need to call him to come, because he has never left. There is no need to prove oneself to be loved, because he has never stopped loving. There are moments when a person thinks they have gone too far, that there is no way back, that what they have done has made them unworthy of any form of love. But it is in that very moment that divine love begins its work, not through reasoning, not through emotion, but through covering. It does not ask if one is ready. It does not ask if one is grateful. It simply reaches the soul and reminds it that it still belongs. When a soul feels lost, it is often because it no longer senses its connection to the sacred. But feeling is not truth, and darkness is never evidence of the absence of light. Unconditional love does not need to be felt to be real. It is real because it requires no condition to exist. Even when you are crying alone in a room no one knows about, he still sees, not to observe, but to empathize. He has once taken on human form, has once felt pain, loneliness, betrayal, has once pleaded in the silence of night and found no light in reply, and because of that, he knows exactly what you are going through, not from above, but from within the depths of human pain. That is why this love is not shallow, not distant, not cold. It does not only comfort but understands. It does not only lift you up, but walks with you through every dark alley. He does not withdraw his hand when you are disappointed in yourself. He does not go silent when you are angry or doubtful. He is still there. When you stop praying, when you turn away, when you lose faith even in him, that presence is not a reward. It is the essence. He has not gone anywhere. It is your mind that wanders, and no matter how far it goes, it cannot escape the loving field that surrounds it. Because love has no boundary, it is not confined by space or time, not blocked by the past or imagined future. Every moment is a door through which he may enter, if you are willing to recognize, not to open it from the outside, but for the door inside you to open just enough for light to enter, and that light is him. In every breath, in every moment, you forgive yourself. In every step you take after falling, no ritual is required, no certification, just one honest moment. This love does not need you to become someone else. It only asks that you return to yourself, to the soul born from light, to the embodiment of a divine intention that existed before the world began. When you stop trying to earn love, you begin to live in it. When you stop seeking validation from outside, you begin to realize that you were never separate from the sacred. And from the deepest place, you will know that he has been there all along, not because you did right, but because you have always been precious to him. Nothing can change that. No memory is dark enough, no action strong enough to erase the imprint of that eternal love. And now, as the soul begins to gently vibrate in its original frequency, the sacred will once again be felt. No miracle is needed, only truth. And the truth is that you are loved, without condition, without limit, without change. No prayer has ever fallen into the void. No tear has ever been shed without being remembered. From the moment your soul agreed to enter the physical realm, a covenant was inscribed between you and the Creator, not an agreement based on fear or punishment, but a sacred promise, a promise that if you forget, he will remind. If you fall, he will lift. If you are lost, he will guide you back. And he has kept that promise, not by preventing all pain, but by being present in each experience, holding your soul together even through the fiercest trials. There were moments you thought you had been abandoned, But it was in those very hours that the promise was activated most powerfully. Because if love does not pass through silence, it cannot prove its depth. And if a promise is never tested, it can never become unshakable faith. In the past, there were times when everything seemed to collapse. Relationships broke apart. Dreams died prematurely. Doors closed without warning. And yet, you lived, not just lived, but grew. There were things he prevented from happening. And there were things he allowed to happen in order to awaken a sleeping soul. For that promise was not meant to keep you safe in the familiar, but to bring you to where your soul truly belongs. When you look back, you will find moments that seemed random, but were in fact divinely arranged. Moments when you were saved from a wrong decision. Moments when the right person showed up at the right time. Moments when doors that once seemed hopeless suddenly opened. That was not luck. That was the promise at work in the unseen. You have been surrounded by a higher order, even if the physical eye cannot perceive it. There are days when everything seems silent, but that is because everything is being realigned in sacred order. Delay is not denial. Silence is not absence. And postponement is not forgetfulness. Everything you are living is part of a greater design. Your soul once agreed to. No moment is wasted. No fall is meaningless. Every mark of pain carries within it a coded key to open new levels of awareness. That promise is not a document signed by hand. It is a vibration engraved in light at the core of your soul. It is not erased by mistake. It is not destroyed by doubt. It only waits to be reactivated through remembrance. And when you begin to place your hand over your heart, when you stop asking why things are happening to you and start asking where this is leading you, that is when the promise begins to unfold before your eyes. In every dream you once abandoned, there is a shard of light waiting for your return. In every word you once whispered in despair, there is a seed waiting for its season to bloom. He has not forgotten, and he will never forget, not because you begged, but because he promised, and the divine cannot betray itself. He is still keeping that promise in every breath. You do not even realize is a gift. In every miracle you call coincidence, in every person who arrived at just the right moment, then left behind a piece of awakening. And today, as your soul reads these words, that promise is sounding once again in your heart, not through sound, but through an undeniable knowing. You are part of something sacred, and the sacred does not break its promise. It only waits for you to remember, and when you remember, every door will once again open, not because you are worthy, but because you are an inseparable part of the love that was promised from the beginning. Fear needs no reason to exist. It only needs a crack in awareness. And once invited in, whether by accident or habit, it takes over the inner space as if it rightfully belongs there. Fear does not always scream. It drips. It seeps through the smallest thoughts. It makes you doubt what you already know is true. It asks questions not to enlighten, but to make the soul retreat from the light. Along with it comes distraction, more quietly dangerous than any storm. Distraction does not arrive as an enemy, but as a busy companion. It does not shatter faith, but causes it to fade little by little. It does not steal the light, but makes you too occupied to remember that you ever had it. These two are allies of forgetfulness. They cannot kill the soul, but they can make the soul forget its power. They cannot separate you from God, but they can make you believe you have been left behind. And once you believe that, the truth can no longer reach you. There are those who do not live in sin, but live in distraction, who do not abandon faith, but leave it to gather dust in a dark corner of the mind, who do not oppose truth, but simply no longer care for it. But what the soul needs is not a noisy world with easy answers, but a silence where all fears must be still. And that silence does not come from the world, but from within. The place where you stop, the place where you face fear without running, that is when truth reveals itself, not as something new, but as something you have always known but never dared to admit. The truth that fear is false, and distraction is a choice, not a destiny. When you choose focus, when you choose to stay with discomfort instead of fleeing, when you face what you have long avoided, it is in that moment that power returns, not from somewhere outside, but from within your heart. You are not defeated by what happened, but by what you have repeated in your mind about what happened. You are not lost because of circumstances, but because you let these spiritual thieves take away your daily awareness. Every time you let the mind follow fear, every time you postpone what matters, every time you choose noise over silence, you give away a piece of light to shadows that have no right to hold it. But he does not condemn you for this. He only invites you to return, not with command, but with a patient gaze, not with punishment, but with another chance, a chance to awaken, to recognize what is draining your life force, and to remember that you have the power to choose again. Fear has no root in the sacred. It only clings to the parts in you not yet illuminated. Distraction has no power over an awakened soul. It can only govern those still asleep. So if you are tired, if you feel numb, if you no longer hear the inner call clearly, do not be quick to believe you are lost. Know that something is blocking your light, and that is a signal not to panic, but to return, because no one can take you away from him. You only need to look again, to recognize and to choose firmly. He is still there, not a step further away, still waiting for the moment you stop circling and walk straight into your own honesty. And there, darkness will have no ground, because light does not argue. It only needs to be turned on, and when your soul does that, every deception will fall away, every fear will dissolve, and everything you thought was lost will return, stronger and truer, because this time you are awakened enough to hold it with clear awareness. No one is created without carrying a purpose. No soul is sent to this world without holding within it a seed of light waiting to be awakened. And mission is never about lofty ambition. It is not a grand performance or an act meant to draw attention. Mission is the alignment between the soul and the divine will that placed it into this world. He has taught that the true worth of a soul is not measured by what it produces, but by the integrity it maintains as it passes through each layer of trial. That soul is not a result of circumstance, but the one that transforms it, not a victim of the world, but a seed of change within it. Yet humans have learned to assign value to themselves through external standards, through applause, through numbers, through the approving gaze of others. And each time they are rejected, they believe their worth has disappeared. But he teaches that value does not come from outside, so it cannot be taken away from the outside. It is not found in success or failure, does not shift with praise or blame. It is embedded in the divine structure of the soul itself. It is light that nothing can extinguish, but to see it, you must return to the truth, that you did not come here to be accepted. You came to fulfill a sacred part in a greater plan. Maybe no one sees it. Maybe no one understands. But he sees and he knows, because he is the one who sent you. Within you is something only you can bring into this world. A perspective, a vibration, a frequency that, if absent, would leave the world lacking a vital harmony. And you do not need anything grand to live your mission. You only need to live honestly. You only need to not betray the deepest part of yourself to be loved, not to reject the sacred within, just to falsely blend with what is outside. Every time you choose truth over fear, every time you choose honesty over conformity, Every time you choose love, even when your heart is full of wounds, you are living in alignment with your soul's purpose. That is the quiet labor of light. It does not create echoes, but it shakes foundations. And true worth cannot be blurred by what others think, because others do not see the full journey your inner world has traveled. They do not hear the silent prayers whispered in the night. They do not know how many times you forgave with a heart still aching. They do not witness the steps you took in loneliness without giving up. But he knows, and in the sacred realm, those things weigh more than any title, because light never demands recognition. It only seeks to be lived truthfully. And every soul, when called back to its mission, is not called to become someone great, but to return to the original self. It was created to be no embellishment, no decoration, simply to shine wherever it walks, quietly but certainly, humbly but without retreat. And when your soul remembers this, all comparison falls away. You do not need to be like anyone else. You do not need to surpass anyone. You only need to be faithful to the light you carry. That is the crown no one gives, but no one can take. That is the value that cannot be bent by time or pain. And in his eyes, that is enough, because he does not require you to succeed by the world's standards. He only longs for you not to forget that you were sent not to search for worth, but to live out the worth already within you. And that, if lived fully, will open doors no hand can close. Because the doors of soul destiny open only when you become yourself. Not more, not less, just true. And in that truth, there is a power waiting for you to reach, not to be acknowledged, but to be shared, not to possess, but to give, like a light kindled never to be extinguished again. There can be no living faith unless the soul passes through 3 sacred gateways. Each gateway is not opened by external force, but by an irreplaceable inner choice. No ritual is sacred enough if the heart has not truly opened. No prayer resounds deeply enough if the soul has not fully surrendered. And for that reason, he has revealed 3 essentials, 3 practices that are not meant to please God, but to unblock the sacred flow that has been obstructed by hesitation and division within the human heart. The first gateway is the complete offering of the heart, not parcial, not only when it is convenient, not only when exhaustion sets in, but a total release of what you still cling to as a way of controlling your fate. Faith cannot live in a heart that remains divided, one part believing, one part fearing, one part giving, one part withholding, and it is that withheld part where fear makes its home. He does not ask for surrender to test you. He asks because he knows that if you do not give all, you will always live torn between light and shadow. Surrender does not make him stronger. It only makes you no longer torn in two. When you place your whole heart into the sacred hands, not to instantly change circumstances, but because you realize the only place it is truly safe is there, then your soul begins to rise again from the quiet ashes of doubt. The second gateway is deep and sincere gratitude, not casual thanks, not fleeting emotion, but a way of living where every breath becomes a hymn of praise. Gratitude is not just a good attitude. It is the key that activates the energy sustaining all life. A grateful person is not grateful because they have enough, but because they have seen that what was once considered ordinary is in fact grace. When a soul gives thanks, even in adversity, it has moved beyond reaction and entered the realm of consciously creating resonance with divine intention. And in that resonance, new doors are opened, not because circumstances change, but because awareness has changed. He does not request gratitude for praise. He urges it for the soul's sake, knowing that when you are grateful, you become clear When you are grateful, you are no longer consumed by what is missing. When you are grateful, so you begin to walk with open eyes and a lighter heart. The third gateway is sharing, not sharing out of obligation, not sharing to receive something in return, but sharing as a flow that cannot be contained. Light cannot be held for oneself. It does not exist to be stored, but to be spread. And love is the same. When you share what you have received, you do not lose it. You multiply it. No one is poorer for giving away what their soul knows to be true. And if you feel you have nothing yet to give, begin with the smallest thing, a prayer for someone in pain, a kind act that needs no recognition, a word that carries hope, and gradually the flow will widen, not because you created light, but because you remove the barriers within so that light could pass through. These three gateways are not a formula for success. They are the essential foundation of a true spiritual life. No one can live in living faith without surrendering the heart. Without gratitude, without giving, these are not just expressions of an awakened soul. They are the path, they are the keys. They are the only way for you to no longer live in separation from your sacred origin. And when these three gateways open, you will no longer need to plead for blessings. You will realize the blessings were always there, just waiting for your heart to open and step in. It is not loud prayers that move the sacred realm, nor is it repeated religious acts that stir the power of God. It is silent faithfulness, not noisy, not self-promoting, not seeking to prove anything, but steady, like a stream running deep beneath the earth, nourishing the roots without anyone needing to see it. He sees what the world overlooks. He hears the sobs that never become words. He remembers every smallest act born of selfless love. Every time you place someone else's well-being above your own exhaustion, every time you forgive without witness, every time you persist in prayer for another even while your own heart is breaking, these things do not fade into forgetfulness. They are inscribed in the soul's field and return as light, not external light, but healing deep within, a healing that does not come from instant intervention but from the steady energy of faithfulness. Because it is this very faithfulness that proves the soul has chosen love over reaction, has chosen light over dissolving into darkness, has chosen to stay rather than give up. Faithfulness is not stubbornness. It is devotion to the sacred, even when no clear reward is given. And in that state, the soul enters the frequency of healing, not by wanting to be healed, but by aligning with what healing carries. He does not ask you to be perfect, but he has placed in your heart a seed of faithfulness so that when everything becomes unclear, you will not walk away. He does not count how many times you succeed. He watches how you rise after every moment that felt like failure. In that silence, a strength is growing, not loud but steady, not dazzling but deep. And then comes a moment when healing is no longer something you have to ask for. It becomes the natural result of a life lived in faithfulness. When you choose to remain with the light, you become a vessel through which healing light flows, not just for you, but for those around you. Many souls have been uplifted not by advice or miracles, but by the quiet presence of someone who did not give up. In a world where people are drawn to speed, clarity, and intense emotions, faithfulness is the path few choose, but it is the path he walked, and it is the path he invites your soul to follow, not to make you religious, but to make you whole, because in every minute you remain with what is right, even without recognition. You restore your connection to the sacred source, and in that continuity, the deepest wounds are reached, not by medicine, but by vibration, not by time, but by depth, not by forced effort, but by a state of living in harmony, and from there, healing is no longer a question, it becomes a natural state. The soul does not need to be patched. It only needs to remember it was never truly lost, and faithfulness is the living memory of that truth. You do not need to do more. You only need to continue believing, continue loving, continue choosing what is right, even without an audience, because he sees, and his healing always begins in the places no one expects, from hearts that quietly remain in love through storms of doubt. From there, everything else will be added. But the most important thing is that you did not abandon yourself, and because of that, he will never abandon you. No one escapes the inner crisis that arrives when the soul begins to awaken after years of slumber. It is the moment when everything once believed becomes faint. Old patterns are no longer strong enough to maintain balance. Roles worn for too long begin to crack. A person thinks they are losing something important, but in truth, they are being released from layers no longer aligned with their true essence. He calls it the shedding of the soul. Not gentle, not comfortable, but necessary. For no rebirth happens without the pain of releasing the old. The crisis is not a sign of error, but a sign of transition. When the soul starts remembering what it once forgot, the mind will resist. The mind will question. It will doubt. It will oppose the very thing the soul is reaching toward. And it is in that moment that one enters the clash between two levels of awareness. One is habit, safety, control. The other is calling vibration and complete exposure. There is nothing more frightening than realizing you are no longer who you once were, but also not yet sure who you are becoming. In that in-between space, confusion grows, a sadness without clear cause, a fatigue with no explanation, but he does not let the soul drift in that chaos. He does not send answers. He sends an invitation into silence, not the silence of avoidance or surrender, but intentional silence where the soul stops seeking outside and returns to the sacred space within, where no voice speaks. Yet everything that needs to be known is present. In that silence, the soul begins to hear what the noise of life had made it forget. No words are needed, no analysis, only presence, only stillness. He does not impose silence as a trial. He offers it as a remedy, because in that state, the psychological layers begin to fall away. Things long unnamed begin to take shape. Wounds never touched begin to ache. But that is not collapse. It is healing. For only when you dare to face your inner chaos without judgment can divine energy begin to flow in. The more you fear the crisis, the more you run in circles without escape. But when you enter it with full presence, without resistance, without trying to fix it, without seeking a way out, it loses its power. And at the center of the chaos, you will find a still point, a zone of light untouched. There, he has always been, not affected by what you are feeling, not disappearing because you doubt, not distant because you are tired, but standing firm like a lighthouse in the storm, and the light from it does not shout. It simply shines. Only when you choose silence will you see it. The crisis will pass, but what it awakens will remain, and what remains is the real part of you, not the pain, but the growth born from pain, not the ruin, but the self born through the ashes. And from that place, you will emerge, not as a new person, but as a soul who has reconnected with its origin. No one can go through that process for you. No lesson can shorten the way. Only the courage to enter silence, to stay with the truth, not hiding, not avoiding, not decorating. And when that happens, no further reason is needed. the soul will know it was never truly lost. It only needed to be still enough to hear the call he sent long ago. Not in the storm, but in the stillness, not from the outside, but from the deepest place never abandoned. And from there, transformation will begin, not loud, not instant, but certain, because this time it comes from within. Reality is not something fixed, but the result of belief sustained in stillness. Each soul lives in a different reality, not because of different circumstances, but because of different levels of awareness. He did not create the world as a fixed mold for humans to accept. He created consciousness and gave the soul the ability to see through it and shape the world it inhabits. Faith is not just a positive feeling. It is the door that leads from the realm of reaction into the realm of creation. When you believe you are limited, everything you see will confirm that limitation. When you believe you have been abandoned, the whole world will seem to align with that feeling. But when you begin to believe differently, even if only a small flicker in the dark, that sliver of light is enough to begin dissolving blindness. He does not force the soul to believe. He does not impose faith as a requirement to receive grace. He simply reveals that every miracle begins from a level of trust deeper than reason. Faith does not come from knowing how everything will unfold. It comes from peace when nothing is clear, from standing in the void without trembling, from having no evidence but still not withdrawing your hope. The door of faith does not open with logic. It opens through the surrender of the ego and the awakening of the soul. When the soul believes that he is at work, even when nothing seems to change, that is the moment reality begins to shift. Not through outer force, but through inner agreement. Faith changes the color of experience. It does not change circumstances instantly, but it changes how you show up in those circumstances. And from that new presence, the situation no longer has the same power over you. You no longer live in reaction. You begin to live as a creator. He has placed within every soul the ability to recreate reality through the vibration it carries. No one is trapped by fate, only trapped by old beliefs not yet released. And when you realize that you can choose to believe in what you have not yet seen, not because you are naive, but because your soul has heard the call clearly, transformation begins. You do not need to do something overwhelming. You only need not to betray the deeper belief forming within you. You only need not to return to familiar ground just because you have not yet seen the result. Because it is in the moment of seeing nothing that the soul learns how to stand firm, not to earn a reward, but to become the one who can hold light when everything around is still dark. He does not use miracles to satisfy impatience. He uses time to forge strength. And every time you stand firm in faith, reality silently takes note and begins to adjust. Not everything you believe will happen, but everything that is happening comes from what you once believed. Change does not come from forcing circumstances to shift. It comes when you shift your perception, and in doing so, open a new level of living. Every time you choose to believe in the light while still surrounded by shadow, every time you choose to speak truth, even when the voice is smaller than the doubt, every time you choose not to give up, when nothing seems to hold you, that is when you open the door, and on the other side of that door, a new reality awaits. Not perfect, but truer, not easy, but deeper, not instantly radiant, but marked by the presence of the sacred that has been activated. It is no longer the old life made new. It is an entirely different plane of existence, and it only appears when the soul dares to believe, not believe in order to see, but believe as if it has already seen, because in the sacred realm, all things have already been completed. They only wait for you to step through that door with your own living vibration. And when you do, what once seemed impossible will become self-evident, not by a miracle from the outside, but by the irreversible change that has taken place within. Transformation is not about becoming a better version of the old self. It is the dissolution of the self you once believed you were, and the emergence of the being that has always existed in silence. He does not call the soul to fix itself. He calls it to return to the part that has never been wounded, the part that does not need upgrading but only needs to be freed from the layers of doubt and conditioning. Every time the soul walks through pain without closing the heart, transformation is set in motion, not by a miracle from the outside, but by a subtle shift in the way you stand in life, from one who reacts to one who creates, from one who tries to control to one who walks in trust. He does not change you to make you perfect by any standard. He awakens you to remember that wholeness already exists in the essence of the soul, that transformation does not happen in a moment. It is not measured by fleeting emotions. It unfolds when you quietly choose light in circumstances that seem void of hope, when you act from trust rather than pressure, when you remain kind to those who no longer stay, when you live in truth, even in an environment that encourages falsehood. Those choices, though small, imprint a new frequency upon the soul, and gradually you no longer reflect the old. Others may not notice, but within you a new order has been established, no longer driven by fear, no longer waiting for validation, no longer clinging to an outdated self-image for a sense of safety. This is the stage where the soul begins to live from the inside out, no longer dependent on circumstances to define worth, no longer chasing outcomes to find direction, but living as one who remembers who they are and acts from that, knowing he calls it a rebirth that requires no form, no ritual, no proof. Only truth lived daily through small and consistent choices. And when that happens, you will find yourself stepping into a new identity, not because you have been upgraded, but because you have been unbound, no longer confined by roles others once assigned, no longer playing a social game your soul never agreed to. You will begin to notice that you no longer react to criticism as before, no longer pulled into old states by memories that once brought pain, no longer overwhelmed by the future because you know you do not walk alone. That transformation needs no announcement. It only needs to be sustained. And when you hold that newness through trials, it will take root. And from there, life will begin to respond with a different reality. You do not need to force everything to change. You only need to hold your new self as a living frequency. He does not promise you will not be tested, but he assures that if you remain faithful to the sacred within, nothing can pull you back into the old version of yourself, not because you are strong, but because something within you has been reestablished. And when truth is rooted in the soul, reality becomes only a reflection, no longer a burden, no longer a battlefield, but a space where the light you carry can be fully expressed. That is the new identity that does not come from striving, but from agreement with the sacred that wants to live through you. And that is the true beginning, not loud, not easily seen, but irreversible, because the soul has chosen to no longer be someone defined by fear, but a living expression of remembrance, remembering that you have always belonged to the light, and that light is now beginning to shine, no longer hidden. True battle is not about striking back, but about holding steady. It is not about charging into the storm with defiant will, but about standing still in the light while the winds rage around. He never taught the soul to confront darkness with brute force. He taught a different way, the way of steadiness, the way of knowing that light does not need to strain to exist. It only needs not to be forgotten. And you are not called to be a warrior in the usual sense, but to become a living pillar of peace in the midst of chaos every time you face what is difficult without losing the truth. Every time you keep kindness while others cause harm, Every time you do not react but observe with clear inner vision, that is victory. Not victory over others, but over the old reflex within, because the real enemy has never been outside you. It lives in the habits of reaction, in the impulse to defend, in the need to control, in the fear of being misunderstood, unhurt, judged, and if you fight those things with the same energy they carry, you will only prolong the conflict. But if you are willing to stand still, not from helplessness, but from knowing that steadiness holds a higher frequency, you will see storms pass without carrying you away. He does not call you to be a striker. He calls you to be a keeper of fire, not to attack the dark, but to prevent it from spreading, not to fix the world, but to become proof that the light still exists. There are battles you cannot win if you continue to fight them with resistance, but you can overcome if you are willing to hold fast to your roots. Those roots are not made of reasoning. They are made of knowing you are standing in what is right. And what is right does not need to shout to prove itself. It only needs to be held without wavering. When you refuse to fall into the spiral of conflict, when you release the need to be understood, when you do not respond with the same frequency, you are doing what most of the world cannot. And that has transformative power, not only for you, but for the space around you. He sees every time you choose to stand firm, when you are misunderstood and do not explain, when you are attacked and do not react, when you are pushed back and do not grow bitter. In those moments, you are not weak. You are stronger than ever, because true strength is not in controlling the situation. It is in holding your essence through every situation. To stand firm does not mean to be still. It means to move from inner intention, to act not from reflex, but from wisdom, to live, not to protect the ego, but to maintain conscious presence. And that requires a kind of strength no eye can see. But the universe registers every vibration. No action born of awareness is wasted. No moment of silent strength is invisible. These moments change the energetic structure of where you stand. They alter the future. They affect even those who witness without knowing why they are moved. No need to speak much. No need to prove anything. Only to remain unshaken. He does not need you to defeat anyone. He needs you to overcome the parts within that, once compromised with darkness, that once easily traded peace for being right, that once reacted to prove strength. But true strength is when you can keep the heart soft without breaking, keep the mind clear without closing, keep the light burning without burning others. And when that happens, the battle ends not in external triumph, but in inner freedom. He does not reward with titles. He gives you something far more precious, the wholeness of being no longer ruled by circumstance. And from that place, every action will carry the frequency of the sacred, not because you are still fighting, but because you have learned how to stand firm. And that is the greatest victory of all. No one can separate the soul from the love that gave it life. No trial is great enough to sever the sacred current between the child and the one who created it. No failure is dark enough to extinguish the light that was placed in the human heart from the beginning. He affirms this without change, not as comfort, but as an unshakable foundation. You do not need to go far to be accepted. You do not need to become someone else to be loved. Everything you ever tried to become is never greater than the truth of who you already were. The soul does not need to be rebuilt. It only needs to be freed from the dust of forgetfulness. He did not wait for you to be good before he showed up. He was there when you were confused, when you doubted, when you wanted to give up, and that is what proves the faithfulness of the Creator. He does not change according to human behavior. He keeps his promise even when you have forgotten the covenant. He holds out his hand even when you have turned away many times. He continues to speak even when you no longer want to listen. And the strange thing is, even when you cover your ears, the soul still hears. Even when you pretend not to believe, the soul still remembers. Even when you go far, the soul never loses its inner map home. That affirmation does not come from fleeting emotion. It comes from a deep knowing where nothing can distort the truth, that you were born of light, and that light has never gone out. It is time you stop asking whether you are worthy, because that question comes from fear, not from wisdom. No one is worthy to be loved, but no one is excluded from love, because true love does not operate by conditions. It does not measure merit. It has only one nature, eternal presence. And when you realize that you no longer need to persuade him to love you, when you stop seeking affirmation, when all that remains is your bare and humble presence, what has always been there will begin to become clear, not descending from the sky, but emerging from within. Not something new, but what has always been, and that return marks a true beginning. Not because your outer life changes instantly, but because the soul no longer lives in forgetfulness. Now, you know, no more pretending, no more forcing, no more running. Now, you realize you do not need anything more to touch the sacred. You only need to agree with it. Agree through honesty. Agree by no longer retelling the old stories of lack. Agree by walking as one who has been affirmed from within. This is the intersection between soul memory and present choice, where you no longer define yourself by wounds, but by the light that continues to shine even when hidden, where you no longer need to win because you are no longer fighting your own shadow, where you begin to live as one who remembers they were born to live out the sacred, not as duty, but as a natural expression. And when that begins, everything shifts, not because you command it, but because you no longer resist. Light will flow through you like water through a riverbed that has been cleared. Love will pour without being blocked by memories already forgiven. Peace will no longer be the reward at the end of the road, but the very means by which you walk. And grace will no longer be something you hope for, but something you realize you are already living with. This is not the end. This is the beginning. No background music, no outward glory, only an inner certainty that you have passed through the veil. And beyond it, there is nothing but the living presence of the sacred. In that presence, you are held, you are nourished, you are sent, not to prove, but to be, not to conquer, but to bear witness to the light that continues to shine throughout the world, through every awakened soul. And you are one of them, not starting today, but long ago, only today, you remembered, and that alone is enough to open a door no one can close.